All right, Bonnie. So the last time that you came on here, we were also talking about a video game, which is what we're going to be doing today. So I guess I wanted to ask you, what do you think makes so many video games stand out to people as what they think is a tale of our time?
Well, video games is by definition a very interactive medium. I think it makes video games a lot more personal for us, for
Hmm.
as the consumer, because we pretty much we insert ourselves more into the story, and I think that is a great tool that video game developers can use to kind of make us feel more emotionally connected to whatever we are consuming, and that makes it a great reflection for our time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tales of Our Times. This is a show where we discuss the stories that move us, what makes them so meaningful, and why others could or should find meaning in them as well. This is not a spoiler-free show, so bear that in mind as you continue to listen. We tackle books, movies, comics, and more. Where there's a story, there's a reason to read. I'm your host, Amanda Stevens. Now, I wanted to start off today's episode with two little short notes. The first one being a note of thank you to everyone who sent in their feedback for our show. It was very helpful, and it did help us to continue going, at least until the end of the year. So a big thanks from me here at Radio Taiwan. And another little note is that our show is getting a little bit longer. Today is going to be our first 20-minute episode, and all of that is thanks to you guys and all of your wonderful feedback. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. Now, I'd like to introduce today's special guest, who was brave enough to come back not only for a second time, but for our first longer episode, my friend Bonnie Yuen.
Hello, thanks for having me back.
Thank you for coming back. I am really excited to talk about the game that you have today, because it's something that you and I have, you have been pitching to me for maybe since it came out. I don't know. I feel like as long as I've known you.
Oh, for a couple years maybe.
So
Yeah.
for people who missed your first episode, is there anything you'd like to say to introduce yourself?
Not much. My name is Bonnie. I am Amanda's friend and coworker. I like to read. I like to play video games. It was hard to choose which thing to talk about today, but ultimately I decided on another video game to introduce.
What I really appreciate about today's video game is it's from an independent studio. So it might be one that fewer people have heard about than some of the other games that we've covered on this show, which is always kind of nice and fun, like to give people a glimpse into some other really great storytelling that's going on out there in the video game world. So
Right.
that's something that I'm looking forward to today. Would you like to tell us what game will you be talking about?
So today I will be talking about a video game called What Remains of Edith Finch.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a little different than maybe some of the other video games that have been discussed already, because I would say it takes maybe about a few hours to get through.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike your traditional game where you have kind of a conflict and fighting, this is almost like an interactive movie.
Hmm.
So if you go into it with a mindset of, oh, I'm going to go beat a monster, that's not what's going to happen. But I think this is what makes games like this a little bit more accessible to an audience that may not be familiar with video games, because it's basically just, okay, here's a great story and you get to participate in it.
Yeah.
And it'll take up only a few hours of your time. It makes it a little bit more digestible.
Yeah, definitely. What genre would you say that this game is? Because it's definitely, like you said, there's not really any fighting. We joked earlier, you said it's like a walking simulator, which is and isn't a joke.
It's interesting because it's a drama, I guess you could say.
Like drama,
Yeah,
suspense.
yeah, I guess mystery would be a good way to put it. There isn't a lot of free roaming to do. It is a pretty
Hmm.
linear story, but it does unfold in a good way, because then the storytelling is much tighter instead of
Hmm.
you going around and maybe seeing certain things out of order.
Yeah.
So yeah, mystery would be probably a good way to put it.
Yeah. you're on rails, but it doesn't feel so much like it's to the end of telling the story. So you're not going to get
Right.
lost. Well,
No, no, no.
would you mind giving us a summary of what happens in What Remains of Edith Finch?
Okay. So at its essence, just you're following around a young girl whose name is Edith Finch. Edith goes to her family home after a long time away, and everybody in her family is dead.
Hmm.
And the reason being, according to family belief, is that the family is cursed.
Ooh.
And since everybody in the family suffers from the curse, they will die. Most of them will die an early death. As you walk around, you will see that every family member's room has kind of been turned into a shrine.
Hmm.
And that was done by Edith's great grandmother, whose name is Edie. Same name, Edie and Edith, but she's called Edie. And Edie has, you know, she believes deeply in this family curse. And so therefore, when somebody in the family dies, she blocks off their room, and basically the room remains the same as when the person lived there.
Okay.
So Edith, the young girl, is walking around the different rooms that have these little shrines that have been preserved with another person's memories. And as she finds out more about it, the gameplay, or I guess whatever the player is seeing,
Hmm.
it goes into little mini movies or vignettes where
Ooh.
you see how that family member died.
Oh. I was
Yeah,
really excited about vignettes. Like, oh, I love a good vignette. And then it ends with someone dying. I
yes,
feel
how
bad
they
for
died.
being, yeah, I feel a little bad for being excited about it. Uh,
Ah, that's where the storytelling comes in. Because even though there's that overarching story of Edith and finding out what happened to her family, the
hmm,
meat and bones and emotion of the story comes from these little vignettes.
hmm.
And there are multiple family members. There are maybe about a dozen of these stories.
Yeah.
Some of them are really fast and to the point. Like
Did anyone
someone got
get,
run over by a train.
oh, that's what I was just going to ask. I was going to say, did anyone get hit
Yeah,
by a car? Like, I was thinking of like, what's a
somebody got
mundane,
run over by a train. So that's easy and straightforward and to the point, right?
not
And then
as simple as I'd anticipated, but yes.
some of these deaths are kind of weirder. They kind of add these little mystical elements into it.
Ooh.
And as a player, you're never 100% sure whether there is something mystical happening within the family or whether you just have a super unreliable narrator.
Mm. Oh, because she, like Edith herself, is afraid of the curse, right?
I think she's a little bit more neutral.
Okay.
So on one hand, you have the great grandmother, Edie,
Mm.
who really believes in the curse to the point where she almost idolizes it. It's
Yeah.
just this is what defines her family.
So she would say this
Mhm.
is like their fate.
Yes, it's their fate. It's their. She even gives out interviews
Mm.
of like her husband died because he was building a giant dragon slide
Oh.
and he was crushed by it. But
Oh.
her story is my husband was killed by a dragon.
Oh,
So
yeah.
obviously she's kind of like feeding into this curse, this belief of this curse. Then on the other hand, you have her granddaughter, Dawn, who is Edith's mom,
Hmm.
who feels like this curse or the idea of this curse is what's causing her family members to die. Not a curse itself, but the
Hmm.
belief in the curse.
They're
And so
like,
she tries to get her family away from it.
yeah, they're like manifesting it is her fear.
Right, right. So I think one of the big themes of this game is kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Hmm.
Do we as people make the stories that surround us, or
Hmm.
do the stories make us into the people that we become?
Ooh, that's an interesting tension. I really like to see that in a story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, ultimately, the game doesn't quite give you an answer, but it's what leaves you thinking at the end.
Hmm.
So I think that's still successful storytelling because it made you think.
Man, so you don't get the answer to that.
No,
Oh.
no.
Well, why don't you tell us? So she explores this house. She's finding all of these rooms that got blocked off. So how does it end?
So at the end, as you go through the story, you realize more and more is happening. The family is quite dysfunctional.
Hmm.
And there are echoes of both really bad parenting
Mm-hmm.
and mental illness that's kind of running through the veins of this family tree.
Mm.
And so at the end, as a player, you are grappling with the question, okay, is there a real curse, or is it just a family that's kind of ill and
Mm-hmm.
not, no, not very good for each other? It ends with you kind of looking at the next generation.
Is she pregnant?
How did you know?
It
Yes,
just
she's
sick.
pregnant. Yes,
So
yes.
she's,
So Edith
that's why
is,
she went back to go look at the house, though.
yes, she went back to look at the house, kind of document her family history.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're playing in the game is basically her writing in a journal and her journey through the house.
Hmm.
And in the end, it does turn out that she does indeed die in childbirth.
Oh,
And
no.
it is
Well,
it is her son that goes back to the family home and is reading her journal.
oh, that's why it's oh, of course. What Remains
What
of Edith
remains,
Finch?
yes, that he is what remains of you.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Poetic,
So yeah,
ultimately. Which,
right, because you don't know. You don't know if there is a family curse. You don't know if the son is impacted in any way because
hmm,
now everybody else's has died. So is that going to continue? Is he the last one?
yeah,
Whether that's foreshadowing that this is just one of those families where misfortune befalls them and
yeah.
he is doomed, who knows,
Oh,
right?
goodness. Okay. Well, man, I really want to find out about it.
The strength of the story, I still feel like is those little mini stories about the different family members.
Hmm.
Um, some of them are quite impactful and could be triggering.
Yeah.
So I would warn any viewers to kind of
Maybe do a little
be
bit
aware
of
of that.
research if there are
Yes,
some topics that you are like absolutely not okay with.
yes. I mean, some of them are quite young, and like I mentioned, there is some mental illness running through the family, and so
Okay. So
that
like bad things happening to children and like mental illness would be two like trigger warnings, I guess we could put on that for people who are interested in the story, but maybe those might be a little difficult for them to encounter. But I have to ask you a couple more questions, you personally. Um,
okay.
so the first question is, you've told me about this game many times. So then diving more into like your own experience, what stuck out to you about this story, or what was most meaningful to you about going through it?
I think I liked the way they tackled life realistically.
Hmm.
Um,
Despite having like everything couched in a curse, a lot of it is
right.
very grounded. Would you say?
Yes. Yes. There is one story that I that affected me particularly, and it's about Edith's older brother. He was a young man stuck at a dead end job, pretty much. He worked at a fish cannery,
Oh,
and
I've
his
heard
job,
about this.
yeah, and his job was to take the fish and push their heads through a guillotine to chop the heads off,
Oh
and that's what
no.
he did all day. And as a player, you're controlling the mouse, and you're controlling his hand. You're grabbing a fish. You're getting the fish heads chopped off.
Yeah.
Getting a fish, putting next to guillotine, chop off. Right. So that's going. While that's happening, you see that Lewis's mind starts to wander.
Oh
And at first,
no.
like part of the screen gets filled up where you see like a very simple like 2D game, like where there's a person walking through a maze and you're controlling this with your left hand.
Uh huh.
And story as Edith's brother's story goes on, you see those daydreams get more and more elaborate.
Mm-hmm.
And visually, it starts taking up more and more of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets more and more detailed. Then all the characters are 3D. He goes on adventures. He's not just, a guy working at a fish cannery anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly the screen builds and builds and builds until you don't see the fish cannery anymore. And of
Oh
course, since this is all about death, you're having this impending sense of doom,
yeah. I'm
right?
so
And
nervous. Even
so,
while you're telling me this story, I'm extremely nervous right now.
and I'm not going to tell you how it ends because
Oh, Bonnie.
is why you should play the game. I think easily for me, that was the most impactful story.
Mm.
And how it ends is just, for me, I felt good.
What themes from that like grabbed you? Was it like dealing with the monotony of life? Kind of the way that our daydreams affect us? Like what part of that really like stuck out thematically?
Um, well, yeah, I don't know how much I'm not giving away because obviously everybody dies
Yeah,
in these
yeah.
little. So the actual ending of it, yeah, he dies, but how he gets there is
Hmm.
kind of
That's the
the
drama.
yeah, the bittersweet part of it all.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
because in some ways, especially for people who daydream, and I'm a person who daydreams,
Yeah,
sometimes it does feel like your daydream is better than real life.
yeah. Especially in the situation where he's in.
Right.
Um,
And I think there are people who maybe will use daydreaming to cope with something that maybe they're either their boring life or something they don't want to face in life.
of
And
course.
definitely that maybe, like I said, speaks to some sort of like a mental issue that somebody's going through.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
And so I think the game being open to embracing something like that and showing how that it can take over your life is kind
Right.
of interesting and meaningful.
Yeah, like even something that we look at as like pretty innocuous, as like daydreaming. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily dangerous, but like it does go back to like everything in moderation,
Right.
pointing out it could even be a coping mechanism. So, building out from that, then what do you think makes What Remains of Edith Finch a tale of our time, or what meaning could other people find in it?
I think the idea of putting things like mental illness or dysfunctional families in video games is very relatable.
Hmm.
I think if you are in situations like that, it can feel very isolating, right? It does feel like, especially in an age where social media is so prevalent and people lead perfect Instagram lives.
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes for people to reconcile that with the mundane or how their lives are. And so having video games be this medium where you have something that you can relate to in that sense is powerful to have.
Yeah. And kind of like again, like as like a pointer or an example to people for like, hey, just so you know, like these things may not be normal, or this is what it might look like, even pointing it out in that way, right? Like we just talked about daydreaming, like the being able to play through something in a safe space and be like, hey, just so you know, this is what it might look like. This is what dysfunction might look like. This is what coping might look like. And you can walk away from this because this is a game, but you're not
Hey,
alone.
there's somebody, yeah, exactly. There's somebody out there who feels the same way.
Right.
Or there are people out there who know enough about this, who feel the same way to make a game about it.
Yeah, yeah. It can be like a really powerful, like I think we've talked on the show before about like being seen or feeling seen. And I think that
Yeah.
that like is really valuable in media. So the last question then is, if you could give What Remains of Edith Finch your own one phrase subtitle, what would it be?
I think I'll go back to that little phrase I said. It's a game that asks us which came first. Do we make the stories or do the stories make us? So, in essence, this game asks you the question: are we the puppets or the masters of our own fate?
Oh, okay. I think that's it. Is It's a good question. It sounds like it'll be fun to grapple with for anyone else out there who's interested in playing the game. So that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for joining me, Bonnie. Thank you for coming back and bringing this game that like I've really wanted to hear about for a while.
Absolutely.
And thank you to everybody else out there for joining us on Radio Taiwan International. This has been Tales of Our Time. I'm your host, Amanda Stevens, with today's guest, of course, Bonnie Yuen. I hope that you enjoyed learning about the game What Remains of Edith Finch. And I don't think we ever mentioned the developer, but that was from 2017, developed by Guant Sparrow and published by Annapurna Interactive. So until next time, this was What Remains of Edith Finch. Are we puppets or masters of fate? A tale of our time. We'll see you next time.